The sharp beep of the hospital's intercom echoed through the sterile hallway, drowning out the steady hum of machines. Maya Turner felt the weight of it in her chest. Her shift had just begun, and she already felt the simmering pressure of the day. Another long shift ahead. Another day being invisible. Her scrubs, faded from countless washes, stuck to her skin. Sweat clung to her brow. This wasn't just another shift. This was the same shift that had happened 1,000 times before, a woman with a name and a degree, but here she was again, treated like a ghost, invisible and dismissed. "Maya, we need you in ICU," the voice crackled through the speaker. She clenched her jaw, rolling her eyes before quickly making her way down the hall. It was the same routine, the same dismissive tone, the same sense of isolation. Maya knew what the nurses thought of her, and what the doctors thought of her. She was just the help, a background figure, someone who cleaned the rooms and kept the patients alive in the quiet moments when no one was watching. She rounded the corner, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The ICU was a war zone. Overworked nurses, exhausted doctors, patients fighting for every breath. But Maya wasn't worried about the chaos ahead. What she was dreading was the look on Diana Harris's face. The look that said everything without uttering a word. Maya pushed the door open to the ICU, her heart pounding in her chest. Diana was there, standing at the head of a bed, giving orders with the precision of someone used to getting what she wanted. When she saw Maya, her lips curled into a thin smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Late again, Maya." Diana's voice was cutting, too calm for comfort. She didn't wait for an answer before turning back to the doctors. Maya felt the familiar sting of being reduced to nothing more than a servant in the eyes of her colleagues. "I'm not late, Diana," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. She had to stay calm, no matter how much Diana's condescending attitude stung. "I was just finishing with another patient." Diana shot her a look, a flash of something cold in her eyes. "Well, don't take too long, we need this room ready for another round of surgeries." Maya nodded, though the bitterness rose in her throat. She had a degree from a prestigious university. She'd worked for years to get here. But all that mattered in this place was where you came from, not who you were. With every step, Maya felt the weight of being overlooked, being treated like she didn't belong. But this time, something was different. The anger she'd buried deep inside her for so long began to simmer, like a fire waiting to ignite. Today would be different. As she prepped the ICU room for the next patient, a sudden thought crossed her mind. She'd heard rumors, whispers about mistakes in the hospital's hiring practices. Whispers about how people like her, people of color, were overlooked for promotions and higher roles, no matter how qualified they were. She was sick of being treated as less than everyone else. Maya stood there, her hands stilling over the sterile sheets as she watched Diana move through the room, barking orders like she was the only one capable of handling the situation. The words came to her in an instant. Enough. She wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. She wasn't going to accept being ignored, being shoved into the background. She was going to make sure they saw her. All of them. But first, she had to survive the day. The clock ticked down as Maya prepared for the rest of her shift. Diana continued to hover around, taking the credit for things she had no business taking credit for. But then, something unexpected happened. Maya heard a voice in the hallway, booming and authoritative. "Is this room ready for surgery, or are we still wasting time?" Maya froze. It was Henry Wilkins, the hospital's CEO. He was walking down the hallway, his footsteps confident and loud. Maya had seen him once or twice, but he'd never paid attention to her. He wasn't supposed to be here. Diana stiffened at the sound of Henry's voice. She quickly walked toward him, adjusting her glasses, a practiced smile forming on her face. "Of course, Mr. Wilkins," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "Everything is under control." Maya couldn't help but glance at Henry, her eyes locking with his for a brief moment. He paused, his gaze lingering on her, his expression unreadable. She immediately looked away, heart hammering in her chest. Why did he look at me? Henry wasn't the type to notice the staff. He was the kind of leader who stayed in his office, making decisions from high above, away from the people who actually made the hospital run. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something almost curious. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt a flicker of hope. The day passed in a blur of patients, paperwork, and whispered insults from the doctors who barely acknowledged her presence. She was starting to believe that the brief moment with Henry Wilkins was nothing more than a mistake, a coincidence. But the frustration was building inside her, and the fire that had sparked earlier was now a roaring blaze. That night, as Maya was leaving for the day, she saw Henry again. He was standing by the elevators, speaking with a few of the senior surgeons. Before she could escape into the stairwell, he spotted her again. This time, he walked up to her, his presence commanding and almost unsettling. "Ms. Turner," Henry said, his tone cool but not unfriendly. "I noticed your work earlier today. You handled that situation well." Maya blinked, caught off guard. She had expected nothing more than the usual silent treatment from the higher-ups. "Thank you, Mr. Wilkins," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "I'm just doing my job." Henry studied her for a moment. "No, you're doing more than that. You have a way with patients, and with handling things when they go wrong. It's rare to see someone with that much control." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if this was some sort of joke, or if he was actually paying attention to her. But before she could respond, Diana emerged from the shadows, her eyes narrowing when she saw Henry speaking to Maya. "Mr. Wilkins," Diana said, her voice full of false sweetness. "Is there a problem?" Maya could feel the tension between them, the underlying animosity that Diana was so skilled at hiding. Henry's expression faltered for just a second before he looked back at Maya. "No problem, Diana," he said smoothly, his eyes never leaving Maya. "But we'll need to talk soon, Ms. Turner. I think there's something important you could help us with." Diana's smile tightened. She nodded curtly, and Henry walked off without another word. Maya spent the next few days in a blur of routine, but the brief encounter with Henry Wilkins lingered in her mind. It wasn't just the compliment he'd given her, it was the fact that someone had noticed. For the first time in months, maybe even years, Maya felt seen. But the hospital didn't change overnight. She still did the same menial tasks, still cleaned the rooms, still stood at the back of every meeting, overlooked and ignored. And Diana Harris, as always, kept a watchful eye on her, as if waiting for the moment Maya would slip up. But Maya wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. It was a Monday morning when the real test came. Maya was on her way to prep a room for a surgery when she was stopped by a nurse. "Maya, they need you in conference room B, Henry Wilkins is there," the nurse said, her voice tinged with surprise. Maya's heart skipped a beat. Henry Wilkins? In a meeting room with her name attached to it? This couldn't be happening. She quickly adjusted her scrubs and headed toward the conference room, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. As she walked down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something big, something that could change everything. When she entered the room, all eyes turned to her. Henry Wilkins was seated at the head of the table, flanked by the department heads. Diana Harris stood in a corner, her eyes narrowing as soon as Maya stepped through the door. "Maya Turner, thank you for joining us," Henry said, his voice commanding but not unkind. "We've been discussing some of the recent challenges in the hospital, and I believe you can offer a unique perspective." Maya swallowed. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Diana's gaze bore into her, almost daring her to say something wrong. But Henry was watching her too, waiting. Maya knew this was her chance. She stepped forward, her hands clammy, but her resolve steady. "I believe there are issues in the way we handle patient care, especially in how we allocate resources. I've seen firsthand how we make decisions that favor a few and neglect the needs of many," Maya began, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling inside her. I think we need a more transparent, inclusive system, one that acknowledges the skills and potential of all staff, not just a select few. There was a long pause as the room absorbed her words. Diana's lips pressed together, and Maya could feel the tension hanging in the air. She was risking everything by speaking up, but there was no turning back now. I see, Henry said, nodding slowly. Thank you, Maya. Your insight is invaluable. The other department heads looked at each other, some nodding in agreement, others visibly uncomfortable. Diana, however, was not pleased. Her eyes flicked to Henry, then back to Maya, a hint of something dark behind her expression. Maya, while your passion is admirable, I don't think this is the place for such a discussion, Diana interjected, her tone clipped. We need to focus on the bigger picture here, not on. Actually, Diana, Henry interrupted, his voice calm but firm, I think Maya's point is worth exploring. If we're to truly be a leading hospital, we need to start with fairness at all levels, not just at the top. The room fell silent again. Maya's heart raced, but she stood her ground. Diana shot Maya a look that could kill, but Maya refused to flinch. This was her moment. This was the change she'd been waiting for. The following days were tense. Maya's proposal had been discussed, but no immediate action came from it. Diana seemed to grow more distant, her interactions with Maya colder, more dismissive. It was clear that the upper management had been rattled by the conversation, but they weren't ready to make real change. Maya's frustration grew. She couldn't just sit back and wait for them to act. The injustice was too glaring, and the system was too broken. She couldn't stand by while she, along with so many others, was continually overlooked. One night, after her shift ended, Maya sat in the break room, exhausted but determined. She pulled out her phone and started drafting an anonymous email. She had to do something, anything, to expose the inequalities, the biases, the way people like her were always pushed to the margins. The email was direct, describing how patients were being mismanaged because of poor resource allocation and how staff members of color were routinely excluded from higher-level roles despite their qualifications. She included specific examples, including her own experiences, all backed by data she had quietly collected over the years. As she finished the email, she hesitated. Was she really doing the right thing? Was she risking everything? Then she thought of the countless people she had seen dismissed, ignored, or sidelined, just like her. She couldn't back down now. With a deep breath, Maya hit send. The next day was like any other, until Maya was called into Henry Wilkins's office. The moment she entered, she saw the serious expressions on his face and the two other senior administrators sitting beside him. Maya, Henry began, his voice neutral, we need to talk about your email. Her stomach dropped. There was no going back now. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, she said, her voice shaky, though she tried to sound confident. I just thought it was time to raise awareness. Maya, we appreciate your initiative, one of the administrators said, though his words felt hollow. But you need to understand that making these issues public, even anonymously, can cause significant disruption. You've made serious allegations. I wasn't trying to make trouble, Maya responded, her voice growing more forceful. I was trying to fix a broken system. We have patients who are suffering because of mismanagement. We have qualified people being overlooked, not because of their work, but because of. I know what you mean, Henry interjected, holding up a hand. But there are other ways to address this. We'll take care of this internally. Maya didn't know if she believed him. Diana's expression was unreadable, but Maya could sense her satisfaction, like a predator who had caught her prey. You'll be transferred, Henry continued. To another department. We can't allow this kind of unrest to fester. You'll get a chance to lead some initiatives in the new department, but for now, it's best if you step away from the main team. It felt like a punch to the gut. Transferred. Stepped away. The system was trying to shut her down before she could make a real change. But she wouldn't back down. Understood, she said, her voice tight with frustration, but determined. "I'll do what I can." Maya's heart sank as she stood outside the door to her new office, the words, Human Resources, Employee Relations, printed on the brass plaque. She had been transferred here after her email, moved from the front lines of patient care to a back office, far from where real change could happen. It was meant to be a step back, a punishment, a way to isolate her. But Maya wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. The office was sterile, with gray walls and an empty desk. No windows. No sign of the hustle and bustle of the ICU or emergency rooms. It felt like a place where careers went to die. She dropped her bag on the desk and looked around, trying to steady her nerves. There was a thick stack of paperwork waiting for her, performance reviews, disciplinary reports, employee complaints. This was a holding pen, nothing more. But if they thought this would silence her, they were wrong. Maya had a plan. She wasn't going to be hidden away. She wasn't going to be shoved aside. She would prove that change was possible, even if it meant playing the long game. The first few days in her new office were a blur of paperwork and compliance forms. Maya made herself familiar with the ins and outs of HR policy, how promotions were supposed to work, how complaints were supposed to be handled, and most importantly, how employees were categorized and overlooked. But amidst the tedium, a breakthrough came. She found something in the hospital's records, a glaring, systematic issue. The hospital's diversity initiative, touted in every company email and press release, was a farce. The hiring practices were not as inclusive as they appeared. In fact, they were actively excluding qualified candidates, like her, who were constantly rejected for promotions. Maya had never been one to back down from a challenge. She began quietly documenting everything. She meticulously combed through files, cross-referenced records, and compared the qualifications of minority staff members with those of their white counterparts. The pattern was undeniable: people of color were being overlooked for higher roles despite having more qualifications and experience. She had the data now. She had the proof. And more importantly, she had a target, Tommy White. Tommy was a senior HR officer in the hospital. Maya had never liked him, not because of any personal interactions, but because of his reputation. He was known for promoting his friends and family over more qualified candidates. His ties to Diana Harris were also well known, and it didn't take a genius to figure out that he played a key role in keeping people like Maya from rising through the ranks. But Tommy's arrogance was his downfall. He was careless. He assumed no one would question his actions. And now, Maya had everything she needed to bring him down. For the next few weeks, Maya kept her head down. She learned everything she could about the hospital's internal politics, making careful notes of everything. She knew she was being watched. Diana made sure to stop by her office at least once a day, a silent reminder that Maya's every move was being monitored. But Maya wasn't afraid of her anymore. The more Diana tried to intimidate her, the more determined she became. One day, Maya was going over some employee feedback surveys when she noticed something strange. Several reports had been marked as resolved without any proper follow-up. The employees had complained about issues of racial discrimination and unfair treatment, but nothing had been done. The reports had simply disappeared into the system, never reaching the eyes that needed to see them. Maya's blood ran cold. This was it. This was the proof she needed to expose the corruption. But it wasn't going to be easy. Tommy White had too many connections, too many people he could manipulate. If Maya made her move too quickly, she could end up isolated, or worse, discredited. She needed a plan. It was another week before the opportunity came. Maya was sitting at her desk, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the window, when Tommy White walked in. He looked more nervous than usual, his typical cocky swagger replaced by a forced smile. "Maya," he said, clearing his throat. "You've been doing, well, I suppose. But let's not forget what your role here is." Maya glanced up from her screen, fighting the urge to roll her eyes. I'm well aware of my role, Tommy. Good. Because I wouldn't want you to forget your place, Tommy said, his voice dripping with condescension. Maya's hand tightened around the pen in her hand, but she forced herself to remain calm. She wasn't going to let him get to her. You know, Maya, he continued, leaning against her desk, it's funny. You're so good at your job, but I think you could be a bit more accommodating. Sometimes, the world doesn't always work the way we want it to. His words sent a chill down her spine. He was testing her, pushing her to see if she would snap. Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. I don't think the world should work that way, Tommy. People deserve better. They deserve opportunities. Fair ones. Tommy's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. Right. Well, just remember who holds the keys here. Some things aren't meant for everyone. Maya's heart raced. This was it. The moment where everything could change. She had to tread carefully. One wrong move and she'd lose everything. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Tommy's veiled threats no longer held power over her. She had the upper hand now. As Tommy left her office, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a critical move in a dangerous game. She had to act fast before he realized she was onto him. The following week, everything came to a head. Maya had gathered all the information she needed. She had proof of Tommy's manipulation, evidence that he was part of the system that was actively excluding qualified candidates based on their race. It was time to make her move. She stayed late that evening, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she composed the email that would change everything. She didn't care if it cost her job. She was done being silenced. The truth needed to be heard, and this was her last shot. She hit send. The email went straight to Henry Wilkins. In it, she laid out everything, the discrimination, the manipulation, the system that had kept talented people from advancing simply because of their background. She even attached the evidence, the reports, the emails, the records that proved Tommy White's involvement. It was a risk. But it was the only way to make the system see. The days following Maya's email were a whirlwind of anticipation. She had sent the message to Henry Wilkins, the CEO, not knowing how he would respond, or if he would respond at all. The silence felt deafening, the weight excruciating. Maya's heart raced every time her phone buzzed or her email inbox refreshed, yet each time, the screen remained empty. There was no acknowledgement, no response from Henry. Was he ignoring her? Or worse, had her efforts been in vain? The thought of everything going wrong was almost too much to bear. She had put herself out there, risking everything to expose a broken system, and now, it felt like she was waiting for a judgment she couldn't control. Late one evening, just as Maya was about to leave for the day, the phone on her desk rang. It was a direct line to Henry Wilkins's office. Her pulse quickened. This was it. She hesitated, then grabbed the receiver. Maya. Henry's voice came through the line, steady and calm. I've read your email. We need to talk. Her stomach dropped. She had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt unprepared. Of course, Mr. Wilkins. When would you like to meet? Now. In my office. The line went dead. Maya stood frozen for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't sure whether it was relief or dread she was feeling. All she knew was that this was a pivotal moment. She couldn't back down now. Maya walked down the quiet hallway toward Henry's office, the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. Her thoughts raced, rehearsing the things she would say. This was her chance to finally break free from the suffocating system that had kept her trapped for so long. But what if this was just another empty conversation? What if Henry was just going to shut her down? She knocked on the door before entering. Henry was sitting behind his massive desk, papers scattered across its surface, a serious look on his face. Diana Harris was standing by the window, her arms crossed, watching her with a look that could freeze blood. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "I hope you're ready, Maya," Henry said, his voice serious. "I've gone over everything you sent. And I have to admit, I'm shocked by what I've read." "Mr. Wilkins, Maya began, but Henry raised a hand to silence her. "No, Maya. You don't understand," he said, his voice growing softer but firm. "You're absolutely right about everything. The system is broken, and I can't ignore that anymore. This goes deeper than I realized." Maya's eyes widened. She had expected pushback, not agreement. But before she could process this, Diana stepped forward, her gaze sharp. "You're making a mistake, Henry," Diana said, her voice laced with barely contained frustration. "Maya has no idea what she's talking about. She's stirring up trouble where there is none." Henry didn't flinch. He looked Diana directly in the eye. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Diana. You've been in charge of HR for too long, and you've allowed this to happen under your watch. We can't keep turning a blind eye to these issues. We need to change." Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was it. Henry turned back to Maya, his expression now filled with a rare intensity. "I'm offering you a chance, Maya. A real chance to make a difference. I want you to lead a new diversity and inclusion initiative. You'll have full autonomy to make changes, investigate what's been happening in the system, and root out the discrimination and bias." Maya's mouth went dry. This was what she had been working toward for months. This was the breakthrough she'd been hoping for. "I want you to report directly to me," Henry continued. "You'll have access to all departments. You'll be in charge of restructuring our entire diversity framework. If anyone can do this, it's you." Maya felt a surge of both excitement and fear. This was her chance. She had fought for this moment, but now, in front of her, the stakes felt higher than ever. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. "I won't let you down." Henry nodded, his eyes locked on hers. "I know you won't." The moment Maya walked out of Henry's office, her stomach twisted with a new kind of anxiety. Diana's glare was cold, but there was something more beneath it. A threat. "Don't get comfortable, Maya," Diana said, her voice low enough for only Maya to hear. "You may have won this round, but don't think I'll let you turn this hospital upside down." Maya looked at Diana, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to turn things upside down, Diana. I'm here to make sure everyone gets a fair shot. Whether you like it or not." With that, Maya walked past her, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had won. She had a chance to bring real change. But Diana's words hung in the air, a reminder that this battle was far from over. Over the next few days, Maya began to put her plan into motion. She met with Henry regularly, gathering data, interviewing employees, and reviewing the hospital's past hiring records. It became clear to her that the systemic issues went beyond what she had first thought. People like her, people of color, had been systematically excluded from leadership roles, not because they lacked qualifications, but because of old biases that no one had bothered to address. Maya started to write a report, documenting everything she had uncovered, but she knew she needed more. She needed more than just the data. She needed the voices of the people who had been silenced for so long. Maya had a plan. She was going to change the hospital's culture, not just from the top down, but from the inside out. Maya sat at her desk, staring at the piles of documents in front of her. For the past week, she had been poring over records, sorting through years of data, and interviewing staff members across the hospital. The results were undeniable: the system was broken. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents of discrimination or bias, it was a deep-rooted issue that had been allowed to fester for years. But Maya wasn't intimidated by the scale of the task ahead. If anything, the more she uncovered, the more determined she became. This was her opportunity to make a lasting change, to show everyone that it was possible to fix what had been wrong for so long. She picked up the phone and dialed Henry Wilkins's number. He had been supportive, but she needed him to act. She needed him to back her up when the storm hit. "Henry, it's Maya," she said as soon as he answered. "I've got the data. I'm ready to present it." "Good. I've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning with the board. I'll be there with you. This is going to be a big step forward." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The board? This was more than just a meeting with Henry now, it was going to be a showdown. The moment that could change the trajectory of her career, and the hospital's future. She had everything riding on this. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves beginning to rise in her chest. The following morning, Maya stood outside the boardroom, her hands clammy. She had spent hours preparing for this presentation. She had the facts, the data, and the proof of systemic discrimination within the hospital. But now, as the time drew nearer, the weight of the situation hit her harder than ever. As the door swung open, she followed Henry into the boardroom. The board members were already seated around the long table, their eyes trained on her. Diana was there too, sitting in the back, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Maya couldn't help but notice the smug expression on her face. "Good morning, everyone," Henry said, his voice calm but commanding. "Today, we're going to address an issue that's been overlooked for far too long. Maya Turner, our head of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, has gathered critical data that reveals deep-rooted biases in our hiring and promotion processes." Maya took a deep breath, then stepped forward. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, weighing her every word. "Thank you, Mr. Wilkins," she began, her voice unwavering. "Over the past few weeks, I've analyzed our hospital's hiring and promotion data, conducted interviews with staff, and reviewed employee feedback. What I've found is disturbing." She clicked the remote in her hand, bringing up the first slide of her presentation. A graph appeared, showing the disparity between minority employees and their white counterparts in leadership positions. "The numbers speak for themselves," Maya continued, pointing to the screen. "Although we've made public commitments to diversity and inclusion, the reality is that people of color, particularly black employees, are severely underrepresented in senior roles. They are consistently passed over for promotions despite having more qualifications and experience than their white counterparts." Maya paused, letting the words sink in. She could see the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Diana, however, looked unfazed, but Maya knew that this was just the beginning. "I've also discovered a pattern of overlooked complaints and unresolved grievances from minority staff members, particularly in departments led by senior HR officers," Maya added, switching to the next slide. This one showed a detailed breakdown of complaints filed by employees of color, many of which had been dismissed or buried in the system. Instead of addressing these complaints, they've been quietly swept under the rug. Employees are being punished for speaking out. This is not just an issue of diversity, it's about fairness, opportunity, and accountability. The room fell silent. Maya could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, but she stood tall, refusing to look away. This wasn't just her battle anymore, it was for everyone who had been silenced, ignored, or discriminated against for far too long. Diana stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger. "Maya, these accusations are completely unfounded," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have no proof of any of this. These are just allegations and rumors that have no basis in reality." Maya's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She knew Diana would fight back, she had too much to lose. "I have the proof, Diana," Maya said calmly. "I've compiled all the records, the interviews, the feedback. It's all here, for anyone who wants to look at it." Henry stepped forward, his tone firm. "Diana, we've reviewed the data, and we can no longer ignore the facts. This is a problem that we need to address head-on." The tension in the room was palpable. Maya could feel the resistance, the walls that had been built to protect the system. But she was determined to break them down. "We can no longer afford to stay silent," she continued. "If we want to be the best, we need to lead by example. We need to create a culture of transparency, fairness, and inclusion. We need to hold ourselves accountable. The board members exchanged looks, murmuring among themselves. Maya could see that the tide was beginning to turn. The conversation had shifted. It wasn't just about her now, it was about the hospital's reputation, about the people they served, about making things right. After what felt like hours of tense back and forth, Henry Wilkins finally spoke. "I agree with Maya," he said, his voice unwavering. "We have a serious problem on our hands, and it's time we take responsibility for it." He turned to the board. "Effective immediately, we will begin a comprehensive review of our hiring and promotion processes. We will implement new training programs, ensure more transparency in leadership decisions, and make sure that every employee, regardless of race, gender, or background, has an equal opportunity to succeed. We will also be investigating the complaints and reports that have been mishandled." Maya's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the change she had fought for. The board members were nodding, some looking surprised, others relieved. But Diana was livid. Her face was red, her fists clenched. But Maya didn't care. This was happening. "And as for you, Diana," Henry said, his voice icy. "You're suspended while we conduct an internal investigation. We cannot allow a leader who has contributed to this culture of discrimination to remain in charge." Maya felt a rush of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. This was just the beginning. The battle for true change was only starting, and there was still so much work to be done. But for the first time, Maya felt like the tide had turned in her favor. The days after the board meeting passed in a whirlwind. Maya's head was still spinning with the aftermath of the vote. She had expected some pushback, maybe even more of a struggle to get the board to make the hard decisions, but it had happened. Diana Harris was suspended, and the wheels of change were finally set in motion. Despite the victory, Maya knew the real work was just beginning. The hospital was filled with tension. Some staff members were relieved that the change had come, while others were uncertain, unsure of what was going to happen next. The journey toward real inclusion was going to be long and full of obstacles. Maya stood in her new office on the hospital's upper floor, looking out over the skyline. The view was breathtaking, but it felt distant, almost surreal. Just a few months ago, she had been a nobody, a nurse dismissed as just the help, invisible to the system that had kept her down. And now, she was leading a major initiative to reform the entire hospital. Her office was nothing like her previous one, bright and filled with natural light. The walls were lined with resources for employees, diversity training materials, and reports that she had requested on her first day in charge. The department was still small, but it was growing rapidly as more staff members reached out for support. Maya could feel the shift in the atmosphere. This was no longer just about her, it was about everyone. Everyone who had been overlooked, passed over, or denied opportunity. But still, the ghosts of the old system lingered. Diana's absence was a victory, but it also created a power vacuum. And power vacuums never lasted long. Maya's first few weeks in charge were spent reviewing policies and meeting with department heads. She was determined to implement real changes. The first step was clear: overhaul the hiring process. No more backdoor deals. No more nepotism. Everyone, regardless of their race or background, would be evaluated based on merit and qualifications. As she sat at her desk, reviewing the list of candidates for upcoming leadership positions, she felt a sense of responsibility she had never experienced before. The faces of the people she had worked with, the ones who had been denied their promotions for years, flashed through her mind. She knew this moment wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about making sure those people had the opportunities they deserved. But there was one thing Maya couldn't shake: Tommy White. Despite the evidence, despite the suspension of Diana, Tommy was still lurking in the background, pulling strings. He had too much influence, too many connections. And Maya knew that, despite her victory, the system was far from dismantled. She needed to confront him. It wasn't long before Maya ran into Tommy again. She had just stepped out of a meeting with a potential candidate for the new diversity position when she saw him in the hallway, leaning casually against the wall, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You've made quite a stir, Maya," he said with a sly smile. "Did you really think you could just waltz in here and change everything?" Maya's eyes narrowed. She had prepared for this moment. She was done being intimidated. "Don't try to downplay this, Tommy. The system is broken, and I'm not going to sit back while you continue to manipulate things to suit your needs," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. Tommy laughed, a low, mocking sound that made her skin crawl. "Manipulate? You've got it all wrong, Maya. I'm just doing what's best for this hospital. You'll learn that soon enough." "I've already learned," Maya retorted. "And you're not as untouchable as you think." Tommy's smile faltered for a brief second. "You don't know what you're up against." "Neither do you," Maya replied, her voice steady. "Things are changing, and I'm leading that change. You'll either adapt, or you'll be left behind." Tommy's gaze hardened. "You think you're in charge now? You think just because you got rid of Diana, you can fix everything? You have no idea what you're up against." Maya held his gaze, unwavering. "I'm not doing this alone, Tommy. I have support, and I have the truth on my side. You're the one who's going to get left behind." Tommy's expression darkened, but he said nothing more. He pushed off from the wall and walked away without another word. Maya stood there for a moment, letting the tension of the conversation settle in. She had made it clear to him, she wasn't going to back down, no matter how hard he tried to intimidate her. This battle wasn't just for her anymore. It was for everyone who had been denied their place in the system. Days turned into weeks, and Maya's initiative began to take shape. She worked tirelessly to implement policies that would make the hospital a more inclusive and fair place. She revamped the hiring process, ensuring transparency and fairness at every level. She established mentoring programs for underrepresented groups, created workshops for staff on diversity and inclusion, and launched an anonymous reporting system to ensure that employees could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. But the real victory came when she was able to bring in new leadership, a team of diverse, qualified professionals who had been overlooked in the past. For the first time in the hospital's history, the leadership team was truly representative of the community they served. It was a victory that felt both personal and collective, and Maya knew that this was only the beginning. One late evening, after another round of meetings, Maya sat by the window in her office, looking out at the city lights below. The view was breathtaking, and for the first time, she allowed herself to relax. She had done it. She had started the change. But she knew the work wasn't over. Diana's absence was still felt, but Diana was only one part of a much larger system. There were still people in positions of power who weren't ready to let go of the old ways. But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready for whatever came next. As the city buzzed beneath her, Maya finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was her victory, but it wasn't just about her. It was about the people who had been silenced, the ones who had been overlooked. This was the beginning of a new chapter, for herself, for the hospital, and for everyone who would come after her. The weeks following the board's decision to implement Maya's changes felt almost surreal. The hospital was quieter, more organized, and there was a noticeable shift in the energy around the halls. People were starting to notice the changes Maya had pushed for, and for the first time in years, it felt like progress was actually being made. However, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this peace wouldn't last long. She had no illusions, she knew that the real challenge was still ahead. Diana Harris was gone, but Tommy White, though on the fringes for now, was still a presence. Maya had made enemies, and those enemies wouldn't sit back quietly for long. The system was designed to resist change, and Maya had become a target. Maya had started holding regular meetings with her new leadership team, a group of individuals who had previously been ignored, passed over, or silenced. They had all been chosen for their experience and expertise, and their commitment to the changes Maya was fighting for. One evening, she gathered them in the hospital's conference room for a brainstorming session. She had come to rely on their input, their perspectives. This was a collaborative effort, and Maya wasn't going to do this alone. "We've made great strides," Maya said, addressing the team. "But we know that the work ahead of us is just as important. The people we're trying to help, the ones who've been overlooked for so long, need our continued support." Her team nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of the task. "I think we need to focus on building a sustainable model," said Dr. Selena Rivers, the new head of the emergency department. "We can't just make changes and then walk away. We need to ensure that these changes stick, that they become part of the fabric of this hospital." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie she hadn't experienced in the years she'd worked there. For the first time, the hospital's leadership felt like a real team, united in purpose. "I agree," Maya said. "We need to make sure the changes are embedded in every aspect of this hospital. From the top down, from the recruitment process to how we handle patient care, everything needs to be built on fairness, inclusion, and transparency." Later that night, Maya stayed in her office, reviewing the latest reports. She was looking at the numbers, how many new hires had come from underrepresented backgrounds, how many promotions had gone to deserving staff. Progress was being made. But something felt off. As she scrolled through the data, a new email notification popped up. It was from an anonymous address. She hesitated before clicking on it. It read, "We've seen what you've done, Maya. We've been patient, but you're pushing too hard. There are things you don't understand about this hospital. Things that have always been this way. Be careful. Not everyone is on your side." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to process the message. It was vague, but the threat was clear. The people who had the power to resist change weren't going to give up easily. But she couldn't back down now. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. This was just the beginning. She had known there would be resistance, she just hadn't anticipated it coming so soon. But she wasn't afraid. The following days were filled with subtle but increasingly ominous signs. Employees who had previously been supportive of Maya's initiatives started to pull back. Some avoided eye contact, others were suddenly too busy to meet. There were whispers behind closed doors, murmurs of unrest among the staff who had been comfortable with the old way of doing things. Maya felt the pressure mounting. She'd pushed for transparency, for accountability, but it seemed like some people in the hospital weren't ready for that kind of change. They'd fought for too long to maintain their power. The system had been built to protect them, and now they were feeling the cracks in their walls. Maya wasn't blind to the fact that some of these people were still loyal to Diana, and to Tommy White. It was late one afternoon when Maya received an unexpected knock at her office door. She glanced up to see Dr. Jeremy Mitchell, the head of the hospital's largest department, standing in the doorway. Dr. Mitchell had been one of the more reserved figures in the hospital, often staying out of the internal politics. He was a highly respected physician, and his department had always been known for being efficient, but not necessarily progressive. "Dr. Mitchell, what brings you by?" Maya asked, trying to mask her surprise. He stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. There was something different about him today, an unease in his eyes, an almost palpable tension in his posture. "Maya, I wanted to talk to you about something," he began. "I've been hearing things. Some of the staff aren't as on board with these changes as you think." Maya straightened up, her instincts immediately going on high alert. "What do you mean?" "I've been in constant communication with the team, and everything's been moving forward as planned." He shook his head. "It's not just the team. Some people. I don't know if you're aware, but there are still people here who are trying to undermine what you're doing. They don't want the hospital to change." Maya's heart raced. She had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed made it real. "Who?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I can't name names. But there are people, higher-ups, who feel threatened by what you're doing. They want things to go back to how they were. And they're working in the shadows, trying to discredit you, trying to get the board to reconsider their decision. Maya clenched her jaw. This was exactly what she had feared. The hospital's resistance was far from over. She had thought that Diana's suspension would bring some closure, but now it seemed like the real battle was only just beginning. Maya sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't wait for this to unfold on its own. She had to act now. The change she had fought for was fragile, and if she didn't protect it, it would crumble. I'll make sure the board knows what's going on, she said firmly. But I need your help, Dr. Mitchell. If you know anything, if you can give me a list of names, anything, I need it. Dr. Mitchell hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering to the door before meeting her eyes again.